Right, so today's conversation is how childhood trauma could show itself in lockdown, how it could, come to the front in lockdown. So I know you've written some articles about this, but also you have your video, which is called Forget Me Not, The Child You Left Behind, which is a great title, but it really says it really is about what it says, that people do leave that child behind, and sometimes we're like 52 years old, but our inner child is still not brought alive. So and what I was thinking about lockdown is that if we're in a situation where we can't go anywhere, it's a bit like being a child stuck in a family where you can't escape, you can't go anywhere. So it's a kind of the same mental state that you possibly was in as a child. So those traumas, I guess, would really come up in that time. And in our videos, we've talked a lot about abuse, domestic abuse, domestic violence. And and I've talked empathetically with the abuser about the abuser as well as the person being abused, because I think it's important to also see what's really going on for both people. So today I'd like you to talk about a little bit about your video and what it's about and what made you want to do it as well. So
yeah, thank you very much. So the documentary came out October of last year, 2019. And there was a lot of stuff taught when I was talking to clients and stuff around rejection of self as an adult. And a lot of that stuff came down to how you learn to reject certain parts of yourself or not accept certain parts of yourself as a kid because it didn't fit into the environment that you grew up in. So when I was a kid, I was told to not mess about a lot. So my kind of happy-go-lucky, carefree side of my child self, I locked that away somewhere, because if I was that kid, I was put down for it or hit or told off or whatever would happen. So I learned that didn't fit. So I became quite a serious little child. And every time I tried to show that side of myself, it was often kind of told to be put away again. So I learned to put that side of myself away. And it took me a long time to recognize that that was allowable as an adult, that I could mess about, I could be silly. And generally it would only happen if I'd had a few drinks. And therefore I was allowing these parts of myself out that that my brain wasn't able to control anymore. So that was the kind of the premise behind the documentary, because it was coming out a lot in my client work. So we were trying to kind of allow people to put their constituent parts of their personality back together and accept that there are sides to themselves that they don't allow to be seen and they actually push and suppress down for themselves. And that was why we decided to shoot the documentary around that. And what came up this week in the article that I wrote this week with the lockdown and stuff, but it was around the confusion that you have as a child when perhaps you are abused or neglected, and the struggles that you might have as an adult, because you as a child learn to kind of shut down from the abuse but still love the abuser. So you're craving love from somebody, but they're abusing you or neglecting you, or and you don't really know what to do. It's very confusing. And we can still carry that again into adulthood. And I used to be very much, sometimes I was the abused and sometimes I was the abuser, because I didn't really know how to handle a healthy, well-adapted relationship. So if my triggers from my childhood would be kicked off, then sometimes I could actually be quite vile to people, because I was trying to push them away from me. I didn't know how to handle closeness. So to just rather than say, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, I would be quite nasty to kind of get people to back off. So I would be an abuser. But on the other hand, I would then have other relationships, which my preferred relationships, where I would be abused. So I would be put down and treated badly and feel like I had to people please, and nothing I ever did was good enough. So I would feel abused, even though maybe that abuse wasn't going on, because it was all playing out in my own head.
So, I mean, a lot of time we talk about this in our matchmaking and our coaching. We talk a lot about how we attract that kind of person into our life, to replay that pattern. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because people listening might relate to that, because, sometimes when people come up to me and say, why do I attract the arse, or why do I attract the woman that's always nasty to me? So, and have a conversation with them, but it's really good for people to hear what's the psyche behind that.
Yeah, and I think it's about not why do I attract them, is why am I attracted to them a lot of the time. So I was reading an article by an American psychologist just yesterday, and he was saying about owning responsibility. And I talk a lot about this with my clients and the work I do. Owning responsibility for your choices. Now, as I said about my stuff, I learned how to relate. I learned what relationships were all about, and I got used to what a relationship would be. So as I got older, that was then reiterated to me by and reinforced by the relationships I then subsequently had. So I had quite an abusive relationship with a girl when I was at school. So I was about 12 or 13 years of age, and she was quite abusive and manipulative, and I was a people pleaser. And then that kind of then went into my first serious relationship when I was like 19. And then that kind of carried through until I kind of got my shit together, really. So I was choosing relationships that my brain knew were familiar. So I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship. So every time I was with someone that was really nice to me, I didn't know what to do. So therefore my brain was saying, you don't know what to do with this, get away now. Or I would just let people that were really good for me walk by anyway, because I wouldn't be on the same energy wavelength as them.
Vibration's different.
Yeah, and my radar was always looking out for the things that I knew I didn't really want. So I was always looking for the things I didn't really want. But there were also the things that I'd got used to. So my brain was saying, well, you know that, so go for that. But all the time I was telling myself, well, I don't want this, I don't want this. But there's a phrase I use with my clients: if I go to the park looking for dog poo, I see dog poo. But I'm trying to so let me rephrase it. If I'm trying to avoid the dog poo, I'm always looking out for it.
Yeah.
So therefore I need to start looking for the flowers. If I want to see flowers, I need to actively seek out the flowers. At the moment, if I'm looking to avoid dog poo because I don't want to tread in it, all I'm looking out for is, so that's all I'm ever going to see. And I'm going to miss everything else that could be lovely and beautiful, and it's just going to pass me by. So it's about tapping in with what we are doing that attracts this type of thing into our lives. Yeah. And therefore we can start to say, okay, if I don't, let me stop saying what I don't want and start saying what I do want. And then my brain will then actively seek out the stuff that we're looking for.
Yeah.
But otherwise we just keep looking for the stuff that we don't want, and then we keep finding it. And then we say, why am I in this relationship type thing again? Well, it's because your brain feels more comfortable in that. It's, there's something else I wrote about instant attraction. It's like when your gut misleads you. So a few people I've met in my life, and my instant attraction to them has been quite overpowering. And it's like, oh, it's love at first sight kind of thing. Well, actually, no, it's destruction at first sight, because my brain is attracted to what I've learned. So therefore, that my brain's sending me all these biological signals that this is going to give you exactly what you want. And actually what it is just going to give me exactly what I've always had.
Such a shame. It's such a shame, you know, when I speak to people and I listen to what they say, and, you know, when you explain to people like what you just said, they think, oh, I never thought of it like that. Oh, that really does make sense. You know, and, you know, it's quite sad because a lot of people are going to be stuck at home with the partners they have attracted, you know, and they are going to be the possible abusers in that relationship. And, you know, it's a situation, sometimes it's really hard to look at yourself and say to yourself, like you're saying, you know, some people can hear that, but it'll go right over them because it's not resonating within themselves. No. What would you say to people that are listening that possibly are in those kind of relations? Because abuse, it doesn't have to be domestic abuse. It can be very subtle, in subtle ways. So it comes in lots of different forms. And sometimes people don't even know they're being abused.
No, that's right. That's right. I mean, like I said, the first serious relationship I said when I was 19, she was 6 or 7 years older than me, and massively
Look at
manipulative.
you.
I looked
Yeah.
old for my age. But she was very manipulative, and I didn't know what was going on at all. And I'd only really realised that when I went into therapy myself and started learning about psychology. And I thought, oh, well, okay, I know why she was like the way she was now, and why she kept trying to keep me in a space that she was happy with, and would manipulate me into feeling terrible. She only got physically abusive right at the end, and that's when I walked away. But for 3 years, it was all emotional abuse. So I think it's an important thing what you said earlier on as well, is that you may be with someone that abuses you in some shape or form which is similar to your childhood, and you will feel the same feelings as a child, especially now, because you can't escape. Whereas you probably wouldn't spend so much time with them, where you probably had some of your own space. You've no longer got that, so you probably do feel like a child again, because you are trapped. And for all intents and purposes, again, you are a victim if you can't escape. And because as kids, we're victims because we've got no control over this. As adults, we're not victims, and that's something to remind yourself of now as an adult. If you're stuck in that type of relationship, you're not the victim. You have got a choice. Now, you may not have a choice to escape physically, but what could you do mentally? How can you take yourself out of that abused space? It's difficult, because if the abuse is constant, it's so difficult to be able to take your mind into a healthy space. And I really feel for the people that are in that situation at the moment. If I was with one of my exes in lockdown, I would be going stir crazy at the moment. I would be miserable and angry and everything else, because I would feel terrible. But it is really important these times that you need to remind yourself that you've got control over your thoughts, which gives you the control over your emotions. And no matter how hard it is, you're not a child anymore, and you can make decisions for yourself which can help you. So if you need to get out because it's getting too much, just get out. You don't have to stay for anything. Even now under lockdown, if you've got somewhere you can go, all the refuges are still open if it's that bad. Go to a friend, go to family.
Also, sorry to interrupt you, but also is the order which I spoke to a lovely lady, Sharon, that she was telling us there is an order that you can actually take if it's really, really bad. You can take an order out and the partner can leave the home, can be made to leave the home. So if it's that bad, if you've got children, it's hard to get up and just move, you know. The problem would be is that you're in this traumatic or toxic, unhealthy relationship in the first place. So you might be quite tolerant of it anyway, and might think this is all you're allowed to have, and this is your life, and this is the relationship you're stuck with. Again, just recognise that's not the truth. And when the lockdown's over, if you want to get away, you get away. You don't have to stay in this kind of situation if it's not right for you, regardless of what the situation that you're in. And it's important that people realise that as adults, we're not stuck like kids. We don't have to stay indoors. We don't have to do as our parents tell us to do anymore, and we don't have to do as anyone tells us to do anymore if it's not good for us. And just remind yourself of that, and try and do as many things as possible that take you out of the environment, either physically or mentally, emotionally. So, you know, there's all different kinds of abuse, like I touched on earlier. There's all different kinds. I don't know if you can name some of them, but also is like emotional neglect and a form of abuse? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, if you've been neglected by a parent, it's abuse. You know, but again, abuse is quite a strong term, but it's still abuse. If you haven't had your emotional needs met as a child, or in fact have had them squashed or ignored, or it's abuse. And you will feel abused.
So the word abuse, like you said, it's quite a strong term to use. You know, some people think, well, I've not been abused. What are you talking about? Because I can see people have reacted like that when I've spoken to people. No, because they automatically associate it with physical abuse or sexual abuse. It's automatically associated with that.
Mm.
I mean, what other terms can you use, you know, to say that you've been abused, and what does that word really mean what does it mean to an individual?
Well, I would suggest that abuse is anything that someone is doing aimed at you that is unhealthy for you, whether that's physically, sexually, emotionally, mentally, anything that someone is doing which is aimed at you, which is causing you pain. It doesn't matter what that pain is, that is abuse. So if I'm manipulating you, if I'm coercing you, if I'm hitting you, if I'm withdrawing things from you or withholding things from you, it's all a form of abuse. So it's just important that you realize that it doesn't have to be something that everybody can see for it to be abuse, or something that's laying hands on you in any kind of certain way for it to be abuse. If someone is making you do things or wanting you to do things or making you feel any kind of pain on a regular basis, they are abusing you.
I had somebody, when I said that to somebody once, they said to me that I'm just a very sensitive person, so I take things on like that because I'm sensitive.
Yeah.
I don't know whether the abuser had manipulated them to think that, which is a possibility.
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
I would say that you just have to check in with it for yourself. If it's not right for you, it's not right for you. If you are someone that's in the victim mentality, then you will always feel something's going against you anyway, and it might not be. So it's for you, you know, it's really important. This is where we kind of came in. It's personal responsibility. How do I see myself? Do I see myself as a victim? If I see myself as a victim and I'm not a victim, it doesn't really matter what goes on around me. I will still see myself as a victim, and I will still feel like that I'm subject to abuse. But actually, I might be the victim. So again, it doesn't really matter whether you think it's abuse or not. If you're doing something which I find abusive, then it's abuse, as far as I'm concerned, and I would like you to stop doing it. If you're not prepared to stop doing it, then I would suggest that you don't care enough about me to take my needs into consideration, and your needs are going to be far more important than mine. And that's where abuse is a problem, because if I ask you to stop and you don't, then again we have a very clear idea that is abusive behaviour. Yeah.
Somebody just posted that they can't hear nothing. I don't know what's that about. Today's been a bad day for technology.
I've had problems all day myself, actually. I've got an event running on Saturday, a live all day seminar event, and I've had loads of problems with the technology trying to set it up today. It's been a bit of a...
Really?
Yeah.
So I don't know what that's about. Let me just see. Sorry if anyone is trying to listen. Okay. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry. I'll just type that. I'm sorry that if you can't hear, because I don't know what's going on. I think, you know, I think for me, I really, you know, when I speak to people, what you've explained, you know, in terms of what abuse is, it seems like a lot of people just ignore it.
Especially because it's normal.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, you know, again, I'll come back to myself because I know this personally. I thought being abused in a relationship was normal.
Yeah.
I thought someone telling me what to do and telling me not what to do and trying to make me do what they wanted me to do by emotional blackmail and the actions that they were carrying out, I thought that was normal. So I wouldn't have said I was abused. But I was abused, and it took me a long time to recognize that wasn't, it was because of my maladaptive patterns of relational stuff that was causing that to happen. But you know, it's not a nice thing to think, but it also it empowers you. If you know that you're being abused and you acknowledge that you're being abused, no matter what kind of abuse that might be, you then think, you know what, I'm not prepared to be abused anymore. What can I do about that? And
when was the point that you realized that no way, I'm not going to be in this kind of relationship ever again? Obviously, you don't mind telling me.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that long ago, to be honest, because I was still choosing people to be with where I would never feel good enough. And that was even up until the relationship before I met my wife. So that was only 7 years ago. So I was in my early 40s, and I sat on the sofa and I said to the cat, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. This is the last one. I'm not going to put myself in this situation. And it was only upon reflection that I realized exactly what I was doing. And I was choosing to be with those types of people so I could end up in the same space for two reasons. Firstly, my safe space was to be on my own. So every relationship I was choosing was based on my need to be on my own, which is when I was a kid, I used to disappear to my bedroom and basically be on my own as much as possible to escape the things that were going on in my life. And secondly, it was my learned relational pattern. I always felt that I was never good enough. So I would then choose relationships that always made me feel that I was never good enough. So I was going around in that loop all the time to find myself, oh, here I am not feeling good enough again, you're better off on your own. Oh, you don't feel good enough again, you're better off on your own. And that was my loop.
So
and
the cat really listened to you, right?
Yeah, the cat did. She said, yeah, no more.
No more. Yeah. She concurred, yeah?
She did. She rang a little bell at me.
You know what? I mean, I've been abused. You know me, my pattern. I've been in abusive relationships, so I know what it's like. And like I said to you earlier, at the time, I think I was so in my head and in my past, I really didn't recognize abuse at all. I just actually thought this is how relationships are. I thought, oh, this is what relationships are. So
they really stink.
Yeah, exactly. And now I understand it's because, like you said, it's because the way you've been brought up, your conditioning, your parents, you've learned a kind of a norm. So, when somebody comes along and does the same kind of thing, then you accept that as being, well, okay, that's just how relationships are.
Yeah. And also your brain says this is what you like too.
Yeah.
This is where you feel safe. This is your secure space, because your brain doesn't like the unknown. It doesn't like uncertainty. So if you go and you meet someone and your brain says, oh, you know what this is like, your brain says this is okay. But actually all the time you're screaming out saying, this isn't okay. What are we doing here? But your brain has already told you, oh, you know this is safe, this is secure. You know exactly what it's like. And therefore we're unable to kind of step out of that place of uncertainty and say, no, I want to do something differently, because your brain says, yeah, but we don't know what that feels like.
No.
At least you know you're going to survive this. It may cause you a hell of a load of pain, but you're going to be okay. At the end of it, you're going to be okay. And when we step out of that space, our brain says, no, you're messing me about now. I don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
And it confuses us, and then so we have a tendency then. I mean, so many people I've spoken to said, I had this really lovely relationship and I finished it to go back to this arsehole or whatever it was. And I'm like, yeah, I know, because your brain is telling you that you can't cope with this different stuff and you need to go back to the old stuff. And it's about just recognizing that for ourselves, that that's what we can do. We do choose to let good things go in order to return to the things that are bad for us.
Because I say to, earlier on in our matchmaking, we talked to women and they would say that, how come I always meet the player? I always meet the player. He's the one. Well, I don't know. You say to him, look, it's the player's game to draw. It's a numbers game for him. He'll go to 50 women hoping he'll get 5 or 10 or whatever. So, and then you attract that player. Not everybody attracts a player. You attract that player and he comes along and you think, yes, wow, he's alpha male and all of that. I like him, isn't? And then you end up in a crappy relationship with this person, and then you question things. Then you make it about you rather than about them, which is a huge thing.
I think if you take it about you in a positive way, I mean, if you make it about you that you're the bad person, that you deserve to be treated badly and you must be doing something wrong, is obviously a lot of the roads that we do go down, but that's not the right road to go down. But if we say, okay, what is it about me that allows this to happen?
Yeah, so important. That is.
Then taking that responsibility is a good responsibility to take, because then you go, what do I need to do in order to stop this? And then we can start to make more healthy choices as far as relationships are concerned.
Yeah, healthy is the key word there, healthy choices. You know, some people are trapped in that loop for such a long time. They are so used to having that kind of relationship. I've known people in my lifetime that have been trapped in very abusive relationships and gone back to finding another partner and ended up with somebody just the same in different ways, but just the kind of the same. The treatment is the same. And, you know, and it's caused a lot of mental health problems for people, you know, to be there. To see that.
They will do. Because again, generally, when we first embark on this journey, when we're in our 20s or whatever, it's not too bad because we haven't been sustained to it for too long to cope. Yes, obviously it's not good, but it's generally around about sort of 30s, even 40, sometimes even into your 50s and 60s, that you realize you can't do this anymore. You don't want to do this anymore, and it's got too much for you. And because it's built up and it's built up and it's built up and it's built up, and as Tony Robbins says, your motivation to change needs to be more powerful than your motivation to stay the same. So it generally takes us quite a lot of these relationships before we go, I don't want to do this anymore. But that's only because we've got to that pain point where we know we must do something about it. And it's very unusual for someone to do this early on in life because it hasn't got too much for you. Unless obviously it's really severe. Then
you know you need out. But you know what I want to say? I mean, this is figures, this is stats. I'm not quoting, this is not my opinion, but it's stats. 95% of men are usually the abusers. What do you think that's about?
Well, I think there's still, I think there's still a problem with the way that boys are brought up, with the kind of the roles. And it's generally I'm not going to say this generally, it's you know, the physical violence is aimed at the boys as well, or the boys act out in a way. And also guys aren't taught to deal with their emotions as much as girls. So that repressed childhood self, the anger, the manipulation, I mean, it's more common in guys because it's never resolved. Whereas it's a lot, you know, you might not have the opportunity or be given the opportunity as a male to be emotional. You know, you're told to stop crying or to man up, or big boys don't cry and all that kind of stuff. And therefore you bottle all that stuff up, and then you put it, and then when you get older, you're going to keep playing out that role all the time. That I can't go and speak to someone or seek some kind of emotional release. I need to act out in the way that I've always acted out. And again, if your role model is an aggressive father or a manipulative mother or whatever it might be, then you would have learned techniques in order to kind of manipulate people and get them to do what you want them to do as you get older. And it's a lot more difficult, I think, in the past for men to be able to take them to one side and say, how are you feeling as kids? How are you feeling? How do we resolve this anger, pain and stuff that you've got building up inside of you? And allow yourself to just go, you know what, it's okay for me to be open about this. So when I'm struggling, I can say, I'm struggling. And I don't grow up with the need to get people to do what I want them to do using coercive, manipulative, violent, aggressive tactics. You know, I mean, a prime example is, have you ever with someone that gets really angry for about 2 minutes? You can see that as soon as they get what they want, their anger dissipates immediately. But they don't know how to deal with the emotion of not getting what they want, so they lose it. And like you said, generally that is a male issue. Aggressive anger is generally a male issue, or not exclusively. Passive aggressive behaviour is generally more a female.
Definitely.
Because we learn that we need to be tough and we need to express ourselves, and therefore we become the more of the aggressor, whereas a female or a girl would generally be taught that she needs to kind of manipulate her way out of a situation to get what she wants instead.
I think definitely, you know, what you're saying about men, they are taught very differently. You know, we have that toxic masculinity, and you know, I remember one of my friends at college used to call other boys big girls' blouses, He's like, you're a big girl's blouse, you know, why are you doing that? And I was like, oh my God. But, you know, and I think that doesn't just come in, it comes in all cultures. It really does. It doesn't matter what culture you're in, that's how, you know, men are supposed to be in you know, when they're growing up, you know, not to cry, not to be angry.
Yeah, and where does that emotion go when you're not allowed to express yourself?
Yeah,
it just builds and it builds and it builds. And then again, if we've got a role model who was aggressive as a kid, or if we learn as a child that that's the way that, you know, if I was a tantrum type child, which I wasn't, I was quite a passive, kind of hidey away kind of kid, but my brothers grew up as quite an aggressive person because he didn't know what to do with his feelings, and nobody kind of taught it. But my dad was quite aggressive. So he learned that the way that you express yourself is through shouting, screaming, and a bit of violence every once in a while. So it's really difficult to know how to manage yourself if you've never been taught how to manage yourself. I call it self-soothing. So generally when we're struggling as kids, if we've got a kind, compassionate, caring caregiver, they will teach us that it's okay and you're going to be all right and it's manageable. But if you've got a parent or a caregiver that doesn't know how to deal with your emotions, they will act out in a way to deal with it in the only way that they know how, to get you to stop doing what you're doing. Rather than helping you with it, they want you to stop. So they could manipulate you or hit you or whatever just to get you to stop. You're taking them out of their comfort zone. And they don't know how to deal with you. So they deal with you in the only way they know how. And then you grow up copying that behavior because you don't know how to self-soothe.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, you know, I mean, that it comes from it's a generation thing. So, you know, that your parents could have gone through that same kind of behavior. The parents could have taught them the same kind of behavior. Then they come in and teach, as a child of theirs, you know, they're doing the same thing with you. So it could be something that's come down from generations, taught generations, right? Yeah,
definitely. Again, and it's all to do with perception as a child as well, is how how your brain decides to deal with those circumstances. So like I said, my brother decided to deal with it by getting aggressive. I got very passive. So I would try and keep the peace all the time, whereas my brother would lose it all the time. So again, we grew up in the same household with the same role models, but my brain decided to put a different coping mechanism in place than him. So I took a step back and he took a step forward. And even though we grew up with the same parents doing the same things, he learned a different way of dealing with how he felt. And that can be, you know, that can be for anybody, could be the same. So even if your parent does come from a generational thing where they're bullying and aggressive and violent, if you as a child then perceive that as I don't want to do that, and your brain says this isn't the way to deal with this, what you need to do is become quite soft and go into the background, you'll generally grow up as more of a passive aggressive person than you will an overtly aggressive person, because you don't really express yourself in that way.
I definitely grew up, you know, from a generation where, you know, it was okay for men to be aggressive. And I became passively aggressive, definitely. Yeah,
and I did as well. I became quite passive aggressive too.
Yeah, I was a very quiet child, but I was definitely passive aggressive. And it took me a long time to realise that that's something I didn't want to be. I didn't want that to be part of my personality.
No.
It still shows ugly head once in a while. It's not.
Oh yeah. Again, if we go into neuroscience and stuff, those neurons are permanent fixtures in your head. You're never going to get rid of those learnt patterns. But what we need to do is to have alternative patterns in place. So if they ever fire off, we've got to say, okay, no, I don't do that anymore. This is what I do. And I need to fire off the new neurons that we're building by the alternate behavior. But notice that if we're feeling a bit, when I am doing something I'm not really comfortable with, is that whereas before I didn't have an alternative, I now can say, actually, I don't really want to be passive aggressive anymore. I don't want to shout and scream. What I want to do is this. And then I have a choice and I choose to go down a different pathway.
Yeah. I think, you know, going back to lockdown, you know, there are going to be children in there. There are going to be women and men, whoever's the abuser, 5% of the women, 95% of the men. If anyone is listening, I think it's it's so important to ask yourself the right questions. Yeah, and I think that's a key, because once you answer the right questions, the answers will come up. What kind of questions do you think people could be asking themselves?
I think the most important question that we have a tendency to avoid is, how do I feel? And to kind of really try and understand your own emotions. Because if you can understand your own emotions, you can also understand your processes for getting to those emotions in the first place. Because we don't feel something unless we have a thought. And we generally don't feel something unless we give that thought some type of meaning. So if we can check in with how we feel, we can understand what we're thinking about and why we're thinking the way that we are, and the meanings that we're giving to things. And therefore we can check in with ourselves. Is this something that's real, or is this something I'm perceiving? And do I need to do something about it? And then you can then start to formulate something in your own head about how you're going to manage this situation. Because generally we are in these situations as well because we've given the power to somebody else. We've allowed them to have that power over us because that's what makes us feel the way that we do.
Yeah.
So it's about empowering ourselves in those circumstances. Now, obviously, like you said, there are certain abusive relationships where it's going to be far too difficult at the moment for us to step out of that space and say, I'm not doing this anymore. Because we don't know what the reaction is going to be that comes our way. But in most circumstances, we are okay. We are safe enough to stand our ground and say, no, this stops right now.
Yeah.
And challenge the behaviour. Again,
do you think, you know, when you think, sorry, challenge the behaviour. Now, do you think, like, you know, as an individual, when you recognise that you are, you know, somebody is stepping over your boundaries, abusing you in some shape or form, you know, do you think it's better for them to get some help first before they challenge somebody, or just challenge them?
Again, challenge is a big word. That's probably the wrong word to use, to be honest. I wouldn't, but when I mean challenge, I mean address it.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I would suggest that if you keep having relationships which are not good for you, then yeah, you definitely need to get some help. You need someone to help you to understand what you're doing, because you're probably not going to be able to see it all for yourself. So choose a specialist in relationships, or someone that understands why we have certain relational patterns, and then they can help you to look at your childhood and your upbringing and your relationships you've had and say, this is why you do what you do. This is why you feel the way that you feel.
Yeah.
But when I mean challenge, I mean, we can do something like just say, I don't feel like your behaviour is appropriate. Or actually ask the person if they feel like their behaviour is appropriate. Or tell them that you don't appreciate the way that they're behaving any longer. Would they be able to do something about that?
Yeah.
Try not to be too accusatory, because we don't know how that will go down, but just say, I don't really appreciate that. Or there's quite a good line, which is, when you do this, I feel this. So you're just saying, I don't like you doing that, because when you do that, I don't feel very good. If they care enough about you, and they're able to sort of put their needs to one side, they'll say, okay, well, you know what, I'll try not to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But if they say, so what? Or if they just keep doing it, or sorry, but, and they try and justify their behaviour, you know you're probably not going to get very far with them. But it doesn't mean you don't say it. It doesn't mean you don't have a voice. But it just doesn't mean you're going to change anything. And therefore, again, you were looking at that relationship won't ever change, and therefore you're probably better off getting away from it. Do
you think, you know, in your opinion, I kind of know the answer myself, but do you think somebody who's been in an abusive relationship for some time, and do you think that relationship can transform?
If the other person is prepared to change. If you're prepared to look at yourself to understand why you're there in the first place, and then try and say, you know, I don't want to do this anymore, and then the other person that's in that abusive relationship with you says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore either, then yes, it can change and it can get better if you work on it. If you're both prepared to work on it, the people that say that the abusers can't change, of course they can.
Yeah.
Because you need to be prepared to look at yourself. You need to want to be different. If someone doesn't want to be different, then no matter how much work you do on yourself, it's always going to be an unhappy space for you, because they're always going to try and treat you the same. If you take away, as they say a lot in narcissistic relationships, if you take away their supply, and there's a term called grey rocking, which is basically you don't give them anything at all to play with. And eventually someone that needs to feed off of your pain to make themselves feel better, if you're not allowing them to see that there's any pain there, they'll stop. Unless they've got some severe mental health problems. They'll generally stop, or they'll go and find someone else. Because if you take away the supply and they're not prepared to change, eventually, when they realise they're not going to get their needs met by you any longer, they'll have to go and find someone else to do that. So you might, just by taking their supply away, if you don't want to kind of force the end of the relationship, if you give them nothing, then eventually they're going to need to leave, because they're going to have their needs fulfilled elsewhere.
That would be tough not to. If you're in that pattern of being abused, and that's what you've learned, and you've not really had any help to create some sort of clearing from your past, then that must be quite hard to not give them something, right?
Oh yeah, because your need is the same as their need. Your need is to be involved in that toxicity. It's very hard for someone, because not only do we get mentally drawn to this, but we get physically drawn to it. So because we're so used to this amount of stress hormones into our system, your body craves the stress sometimes, and the tension that being in a toxic relationship can cause. So you don't know how to be calm. So you're feeding off of this as much as they are. In some circumstances, not only are you getting your psychological needs met, you're getting your physical needs met at the same time, because your body gets used to being in that state, and your body doesn't know what to do when it's not in that state. So it sends signals to your brain to say, create this state so I can feel comfortable. And then your brain goes, oh, what can I do? And it causes a bit of toxic atmosphere, and then you feel better. So it's such a complex thing until you sit down with someone and really work out what your stuff is. It's really hard to kind of figure out exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Like, for example, in those kind of situations, say somebody's trying to push your buttons, they're trying to push your buttons to get a reaction out of you so that they can get something, because their anxiety is so high, they can have a release, and they're pushing your buttons. I would say lock yourself in the toilet. Done it many a times. I've walked away and I've locked myself in the bathroom until the situation has calmed down, and then it gives me time to self-reflect and see what's going on, and I don't get roped into that conveison.
So what I also suggest that you do?
Yeah, that's what I say. Is there tips?
Take the remote control with you.
I love it. Yes, definitely.
They're your buttons. You control them.
So
if
true.
You don't want them to be pressed, don't let them be pressed.
So true. But you've got to know what those buttons are, right?
That's the key.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just to know what your triggers are. If you're allowing your buttons to be pressed, you're doing it because it meets a need for you. If you're still allowing that to go on, if you know, well, I know if they do that, that's going to make me do this, and I don't want to do this, but you still do it, you're allowing your buttons to be pressed. So you need to be able to take control of your remote control and say, these are my buttons. Am I going to allow them to be pressed or not? I think also, I think when I've spoken to women and men, actually, I've spoken to one or two men who have been in abusive relationships. They don't seem to get that there's a 50-50% of each partner in that relationship. They don't seem to get that, because they're always in that victim mode, which means the other person's kind of dominating them all the time. So they see themselves down there, but they don't realize they have 50% responsibility in that relationship. Yeah. And again, also, I would suggest there is a biological factor about the male being the dominant person in a relationship. Tony Robbins talks about it, and a lot of other people mentioned it. There is a biological thing, depending on whether you believe in evolution or creation. Women like to feel safe. They like to feel secure. If a female or the kind of the more feminine energy in a relationship, because it could be a same-sex relationship.
Yeah.
The more feminine energy likes to feel safe,
Mm.
and the more masculine energy is the one that does the safety.
Mhm.
So therefore, it is more normal that the masculine energy is the male. So therefore, they will be the more dominant partner.
Yeah.
Because again, there's a sense of alpha male kind of female then, or feeling secure, because they're going to feel looked after and they're going to feel safe.
Yeah.
And that is a biological thing that goes back to our cave dwelling days, where we evolved as a species, where the male was the one that did the hunting, the killing, and the protecting, and the female did the looking after the family, bringing up the kids, and keeping the cave clean, and
all those things.
You know,
talking about that,
society anymore. So we need to kind of address the balance in that.
Yeah, talking about that's like the alpha male, right? He's the one. A lot of the times I've heard people say that the alpha male is the one that's going to be aggressive, that's going to be dominant, that's going to be, possibly abusive. But a lot of us women like that alpha male.
Yeah, because it gives us a sense of something. And it's just about to check in to see, okay, that kind of person, what does that happen? And it could be a very ancestral thing of that guy is aggressive, he knows, he stands his ground, he's going to keep me safe.
Yeah.
But actually, he's the one that's going to cause you the most damage.
Yeah.
But our psychology doesn't recognize that. So again, it's important to say, what would I be choosing someone like that for? And what does alpha male actually really mean? Do I need someone that is that dominant, that's aggressive, that stands their ground so much? Because actually, how does that then going to be reflect on our relationship? Basically, I'm never going to get what I want.
No.
So there needs to be they can exhibit this outside of the home, but how are they with me? And if they're the same with you as they are outside of the home, you're going to be very, very miserable.
Yeah. What's the opposite to alpha male? Is there a word for it? Because I've never heard it.
Well, what's the with the? I think they're alpha females as well, aren't they?
Yeah, well, now there's
in the wolf pack, it's an alpha male. Well, it's actually an alpha female that kind of controls that whole thing.
Yeah.
So I would
there's
imagine
an up and rise of alpha females, definitely.
Yeah.
Your final tips. We've come to time, and I know we started really late, but we've come to time. Your final tips for people who are possibly in some sort of relationship at the moment that they know in their hearts or their minds or wherever that it's not good for them. This relationship is not good. What's your final few tips for those people?
If it's, I think just to keep yourself emotionally safe, to keep yourself mentally safe, and obviously if it's a physical thing, keep yourself physically safe.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of physically abusive relationships out there, but they're not the most common. So if you are in that, then it's about keeping yourself as physically safe as you possibly can, and then figuring out for yourself what your needs are. What do you want to do when this lockdown is over? How are you going to get yourself into a happier, less stressed and healthier space? If it's a mental thing, then it's a lot easier for you to manage. If it's an emotional thing, again, it's a lot easier for you to manage, going back to the kind of buttons analogy. You don't have to be triggered, so you don't have to feel a certain way. It's just probably the way that you're used to feeling. So you can choose to put yourself in a different mindset. And as we know, the mind controls the emotions. You don't have an emotion without a thought. So get on top of your thought processes, figure things out, tell yourself how you're going to feel, whether you're going to react. Are you going to allow yourself to be the victim? Are you going to address the behavior? Again, you know the environment. I don't know your environment. You'll know if you feel like it's safe enough for you to address it or not. And then once you figure that out, thinking, is it safe to address it? And then am I not doing this because it's better for me, or am I not doing it because I'm worried about them? So if you don't feel that they're going to cause you any harm, then it's okay for you to address the behavior. And if you don't think they're going to cause you any harm and you still don't address the behavior, then you're really stuck in your own stuff.
Sure.
And you need it to be the same. But
Yeah.
so I would just suggest that if you can, you've got control of this. It's the only thing we actually really have control of is our own thoughts. We can't control everything that goes on around us. So just try and get on top of your own thoughts as much as you can.
Thank you, John. I don't know if anyone listening, if you can still hear us, I really don't know what happened today, but if you're listening, if there's something that you actually took away from that conversation, it'd be great to have your comment in there. And thank you again for listening.